Today we're holding a summit in the new circumstances we find ourselves in, one that doesn't bring people together physically but digitally. And so welcome to everyone from all over the world who's joining us today. A particular thank you to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, to Project Everyone, and to the One Campaign. We put this together, and we put this together because 3-4 months ago we were holding one of our open news meetings, one of these think-ins, and what struck us most was that there'd never been quite a time where there was a need for global leadership, and never quite a time where there'd been such little evidence of one. And so what we thought we might do is say, well, the G7 isn't meeting, but the 7 billion people on the planet, if you like, the G7 billion, surely needs evidence of leadership and an agenda for leadership. And in that spirit, we thought we would have a go at beginning to articulate one. And I should just say one thing about the way we approach journalism. I said that it's open. We're an open newsroom. We want to be informed by our members, Tortoise members. We want to be informed, of course, by other newsrooms too. I know that there are plenty of other journalists joining us today. Please do weigh in, whether you're a colleague from Tortoise, a member of Tortoise, a journalist in another newsroom. Please do weigh in. You can either raise your hand, everyone knows the way around Zoom these days, you can either raise your hand or just put a point in the chat, and what I'll do is I'll bring you into the conversation, get the chance to put your point or question directly to the speakers through the course of the day. And of course, we start this morning with the Chief Executive of AstraZeneca, Pascal Soriot. Pascal, thank you so much for joining us. The reality is we can't really have a conversation about global leadership. We can't have a conversation about what needs to happen next without having a conversation about vaccine development. And it's hard to think of anyone better to have that conversation with than you, Pascal. Clearly there is a huge amount of interest and an enormous amount riding on the development of a vaccine. I'm going to encourage people to weigh in and, as I say, join you in the conversation as we get going. But why don't you start, if you would, by just telling us what we can now reasonably expect a vaccine to do, and I suppose more importantly still when we can expect a vaccine to be available.
Well, thank you, James, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me. What could a vaccine do? I mean, we basically hope that it will be protecting as many people as possible. The questions that really we have to answer through clinical trials are, number one, is the vaccine effective, of course? And number two, what kind of protection does it provide? In a sense, does it protect 50% of the people? That's the minimum the FDA in the US has established as a target. Does it cover 60%, 80% of the people? So that's one question. Of course, older people tend to have an immune system that doesn't respond as well as younger people to vaccines. So this may be a population that is not well protected. That's what we're studying. And the last question is how long? Because if a vaccine works, we will know that in the next few months. The next question will be for how long? Are you protected for 3 months, which is useful, but not very useful, of course? Are you protected for 12 months? Are you protected for 2 years or more? And this answer will only come as the trials continue. It will take time to give this final answer. Now, as to the first question, which is, does it protect people, at least for a period of time? We should know that before the end of the year. And the big question that we, and when I say we, I mean the industry, the people developing vaccines are dealing with is what is the, what we call in our industry jargon, the event rate. Or the attack rate.
What? Could you say that again? The what, Pascal?
The events rate or the attack rate, which is what is the infection rate in the community? How many infections are there in the community? Because you will understand, of course, that in a study you compare a group of people who are vaccinated to a group of people who are not vaccinated. But if there's no infection in the community, you cannot show the vaccine is protecting the vaccinated individuals because there's no infection. And so, and then the events rate, the number of infections, of course, influences the speed at which you get to results. To be statistically significant, you design the study to have to reach a certain number of infections. When you reach these infections, this number of events, which is the same for cancer studies and other studies, then you know you can look at the study and compare the two groups. And so, to accumulate infections, it can happen quickly if there's a lot of infections in a community, or it can take a long time. So we're very much at the mercy, in fact, of the infection rate. In the UK, as you know, it declined. It may go up again, but it has declined the last few months. We also have a study in Brazil where the infection rate has been high, and we have a study in South Africa where the infection rate has been high. So, that basically will define how quickly we get a readout, and it's the same for the studies that are running in the US.
So Pascal, then I'd like to come to each of those things. Some of the points you make about, is it 50%, is it 80% efficacy, how long does it work for? And some of the issues too in understanding how effective a phase 3 trial of 30,000 people is. But everyone's very well aware that AstraZeneca, in conjunction with Oxford University, is a front runner in the development of a vaccine. And I'm sure most people on call today will have seen that there was a pause this week to that phase 3 trial. Can you just explain what's happened and what it means?
Yeah, so of course, you're looking at the efficacy of a vaccine in the phase 3 program, but a very, very important aspect is safety, because you are going to vaccinate people who are healthy otherwise, and you cannot afford. When you're treating cancer patients, and people are unfortunately about to die, some side effects are more tolerated, but if you're vaccinating healthy people, side effects, of course, are not tolerated. So you have to be very prudent, very careful as you run your trial. So essentially, the process is always in vaccines trials that if you have an event that you didn't expect, then you stop to look at it and explore it and study it. And that's what happened in our case. But it's really common. In fact, I was reading an article in the Financial Times this morning, and there's a quote by Jeremy Farrar in this article. And you may know Jeremy, of course, he's the director of the Wellcome Trust. And he's very experienced in infectious diseases and vaccines. He was saying that it is very unusual for a vaccine trial to not stop like we did. It's very common, actually, and many experts will tell you this. The difference with other vaccines trials is the whole world is not watching them, of course. So they stop the study and they restart. So what happened here is not uncommon.
Pascal, to be honest, the more I looked into this yesterday, the more confused I was, in that, on the one hand, as you say, there are people like Jeremy Farrar of Wellcome saying, look, it's very standard that you pause a trial. Someone was saying, look, there is some evidence that there are connections between transverse myelitis. I think this is the circumstance that afflicted this individual, inflammation of the spinal cord, and vaccinations, not necessarily this specific one. But of course, it sounds like a very worrying condition, that. And so it's hard for us to read how significant it is. I appreciate that pauses are routine, but having looked at it more closely, how significant a delay, how significant a concern do you think that this particular issue is?
Yeah, so I have to, first of all, correct the statement, actually, James. We don't know if it is a transverse myelitis.
Oh, I see.
There are more tests that are being done on the patient, on the person who developed those symptoms. And it's complicated, of course, and you have to do a number of tests, and you have to take time. And when this is all finished, the physicians will, of course, share the data with the safety committee. In a trial like this, you establish a committee of experts that you call the DSMB. It's an independent safety committee. They are independent from the company, but they're also independent from the trial sponsors, in that instance, Oxford University. And they review the data and they make a determination. So that process has to unfold before we can conclude what it is. So we don't know what the final diagnosis is, and we should really keep this in mind. Now, as to TM itself, transverse myelitis, it is a very rare event. So you will find people saying, it's correlated, other people it's not correlated. And it's very hard because it's a rare event. Essentially, you cannot determine fully. So the experts are probably debating this, whether it's related or not. What is true is that you will see transverse myelitis mentioned in the product information of several other vaccines. And the problem is, it's not a problem, but the issue with vaccine is you actually vaccinate thousands and thousands of people. So you will see all sorts of issues come up that are often not related to the vaccine, and just like events that were going to happen anyway, because they happen. I mean, people fall sick, people develop all sorts of symptoms. So what you have to do there is compare over time the vaccinated arm and the control arm, and to see whether you have more safety events in one than the other. And if you look again at many vaccines trials, you will see they have quite a lot of what you would call adverse events. But in fact, when they compare the control arms and the treatment arm, they basically are the same, because people will develop some of these conditions, and you will see that if you vaccinate tens of thousands of people, of course. You're on mute, James.
Sorry, I was muted. That's largely, as we were saying, Pascal, before we started, the excitement I've got here is a very overexcited dog. So I decided that so that we could understand how this was working, I mute myself. Pascal, what are we talking about in terms of the scale of a pause? Is this a matter of days, weeks, months?
Yeah, this is another question that we cannot answer. And look, I do realize people have lots of questions, and believe me, I would like to have the answers for ourselves to start with.
Yes.
But we have to be patient with these things, and we have to do the right thing, and we have to follow the process as it is established. And the process, as I said, is a full workup on this person is being done. The physicians, the experts will basically analyze this. It's going to be submitted to the independent safety committee, and then basically we will know, the safety committee will tell us what to do. And, you know, we hope that in the end, of course, the sequence will be, like it often is, like the safety committee tells you can restart the study, but they may also reach a different conclusion, and we have to accept that. I mean, the decision is in their hands, and there's nothing we can do to learn more until basically the whole process has unfolded.
Well, all right, Pascal, I think that we'll probably want to understand more about the phase 3 trial, but actually Andrew McConaughey's sort of raised a question from the start about whether or not this pause itself is helping us reframe our thinking about speed and safety. Andrew, do you want to put the point to Pascal?
I don't know if Andrew is on mute. I can't hear.
There he is. I think he's there. Andrew, if you can put your camera on, that would be great. There you are.
You're on mute.
Well, I still can't hear you, Andrew. Forgive us. There you are. Now we can.
There we go. Yes, great. Thanks for taking my question. It's just a question about whether we've got to the stage where talking about speed and a race to developing these vaccines has become perhaps somewhat unhelpful, particularly from the general public's perspective, but also for the ordinary process of drug development, which the general public aren't familiar with. And maybe that will help reset our expectations about timing.
Well, I think that, I mean, speed and proper process and safety can be combined. Now, the one thing you cannot compromise is safety. And that's why we have a very robust process in place. This is why we stopped enrollment in that study, because we really want to make sure that our safety process is respected, and it's really, really important. But you can combine safety with some level of speed. And the way you do this is you have to apply a different process. And usually pharmaceutical companies work on a vaccine or new medicines. They accumulate data, clinical trials data, and then they submit the whole package to the regulators. And it takes a long time to accumulate this data, and then the regulators take a few months to review this. So here we're doing this in parallel. We're talking to the regulator on a regular basis. We're sharing our data as we go. You could not do this for every single vaccine or drug, because the system would not be supporting it. The regulator would not have the resources, the company, they would not work. But for this one, you can do it. The other thing you can do is parallel track the development and the manufacturing. So you start manufacturing the vaccine before you know the results of the clinical trial. Now, of course, the risk you run here is you're going to waste money, because if the vaccine doesn't work, then this manufacturing has been done, you know, for nothing really. And it's a financial risk. But when you see the impact of this disease on the world from a health viewpoint, but also from an economic viewpoint, the few $100 million that are invested at risk, I think, are well well worth financial risk. But this is how you do it. But safety cannot be compromised.
So Pascal, thank you, and Andrew, thank you too. There are a number of people who've got their hands up. I'm going to come, if I can, in a moment to Rani Das, and I see that Gillian Deutsch has got a question. One of the things that happens as a result of this, Pascal, is I imagine there's a level of public scrutiny as well as professional and industrial scrutiny of what you're doing that hasn't happened before. And so you have people like me who don't really understand vaccine development or trials suddenly running a slide rule over the way the industry operates. And so one of the things that's struck me as sort of worrying, I suppose, is that a phase 3 trial, as I understand it, is conducted with 30,000 people, which, as you say, may work if you're developing a treatment for people who are sick. But if you're going to vaccinate potentially 7 billion people, or a good proportion of those, presumably 30,000 is too small a sample to pick up all of the unintended consequences of a vaccine. And I wondered how you think about the trial process and the safety process in this very specific context.
Yeah, first of all, James, in our case, the size of the study, of the program, I should say, is going to be more like 50 to 60,000 people vaccinated when we are finished. That's the normal size of a vaccine trial, a vaccine development program. And then, so already you have 50 to 60,000 people. And with this, you're going to pick up very rare events. But beyond that, I think the governments have programs or plans to vaccinate the population over a period of time. They're not going to vaccinate everybody. And because vaccines will not be available for everybody on day one. Every manufacturer is speeding up the manufacturing process, but we will not have the capacity, even as an industry collectively, to supply the hundreds of millions of doses that are necessary. We won't be able to supply these, in the first few months. So the governments will have to prioritize populations, and probably they'll prioritize population at risk or healthcare workers, and then over time you expand it. So it's not going to be like you vaccinate the entire population on day one.
So even the 50 to 60,000, do you feel confident that that's enough people?
Typically, it's enough in a vaccine program, yes.
Okay.
And honestly, if you look at the product information of many other vaccines, you will see that what you see in the product information is typically the adverse events that have been reported in the clinical program, and then you see a sort of a real-life pharmacovigilance adverse events that were reported later. But in the clinical program, you see a whole range of adverse events that you also see in the control arm, by the way, because what is called an adverse event, but it actually can be related to the vaccine, or it could just be something that happens to people. So out of 50 or 60,000 people, you pick up, what you need to pick up typically.
Right. Pascal, I want to bring in some of the Tortoise members, and I know some of the other reporters on the call. Gillian Deutsch had a question. I saw Harry Moy had a point, Ludwig Berger too. So Gillian, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to answer my question. I was curious, you were quoted in Stats providing investors with more information about the patient's at-risk condition. For example, you also said that there was a patient in July who experienced neurological symptoms, although this was a patient who was later diagnosed with MS that was not related to the vaccine. I'm curious though, by not making this information public, does this allow for rumors and vaccine hesitancy to flourish?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The information about the first patient was actually public before I mentioned it yesterday. And yesterday, by the way, I know some people have suspected we set up this investors meeting. The investor meeting yesterday, it's called the JP Morgan conference, and they call it the CEO series, which is they invite CEO of pharma companies. And last week, I think it was Roche. Next week, I think it's the CEO of GSK. So it was planned many, many months ago. In fact, it was planned 6 or 8 months ago, and it's a series of interviews or meetings that take place with all the pharma companies. So there was not a specific event, and basically what I said about the first event was a confirmation of what had been communicated before, actually.
Gillian, thanks so much. Ali Bourhani, you had a question too, and then, as I said, I'm going to come to Harry Moy.
But by the way, typically, what as I said, this when you pause, and again, I would like to send you back to this comment Jeremy Farrar made about it's very unusual to not pause. So in fact, it is usual to pause. Well, typically, when you pause, you basically pause the trial, you investigate, and then you restart, unless it is, of course, a big problem, and then you have to stop completely, but or take more time. But otherwise, you restart. But again, this is something that the company typically manages with the investigator group. What we have here is a very special set of circumstances when the entire world becomes involved in the conduct of a clinical trial and wants to know every step of the way. But the reality is we all have to be very patient and see how it unfolds. And at the end of the day, we will know at some point whether the vaccine works and can be used, and if it's safe. We just have to be patient.
Yeah, Pascal, thanks so much. Ali Bourhani.
Pascal, thank you for all of your efforts, and thank you to James and Tortoise for bringing us all together. Two quick questions. One is that when pharmaceutical companies ask the governments for, legal indemnity and nobody can go after them, this sends an unnerving message to the average Joe and anybody out there. So my question is, if it's safe, why would you need that indemnity? Second thing is that wouldn't it, for building the confidence, it would be sending a great message if the ministers of health, chief scientists, and heads of pharma would take the vaccine first themselves, and leading by example. And then in terms of the distribution, yesterday, IATA said you need 8,000 Boeing 747s to take this around the world. My question is around the refugee camps and the mass populations of refugees. Where do they stack up in receiving the vaccine if you go out and to the market? Thank you.
Yeah, so I have several questions. First of all, I would say that this indemnification is typical in a situation of pandemic. In fact, it is so typical that it's actually part of US legislation, US law, where you have, in fact, more than indemnification in the US. You had they have even more than the indemnification that you get in Europe. You get immunity. So indemnification means people can sue you, the government will indemnify you. Immunity means you cannot even be sued. People have to sue the government. So it's in US law. It's called the PrEP Act. And it's, it has to be activated by the government, but it's planned in the law. So it's really usual. In our case, we supply this vaccine at no profit. So it's clear that we need partnerships with governments in terms of the manufacturing, but also the safety aspects or the indemnification aspect. The reason this indemnification exists is not to keep everybody protected from true side effects. It's really that at the end of the day, when you vaccinate thousands or millions of people, you're going to have people who can sue you, even if their lawsuit is not justified. And therefore, having this protection ensures that only the people who truly deserve to be indemnified are indeed indemnified. Otherwise, companies will be flooded with lawsuits that some of them would be justified, others would not be justified. And it becomes unsustainable. It is not viable. So no company would develop the vaccine. So it's a choice society has to make, right? So that's the background of it. In terms of being vaccinated, it's another one where we cannot win, because if we get vaccinated, we will be accused to vaccinating ourselves first. Many of our employees have asked, and of course we can't do this until the vaccine is safe and effective. But even when the vaccine is safe and effective, if we start with ourselves, people will say, well, you prioritize yourself and not the broader community. So even internally, we have this kind of discussions. Can we include our own employees, or should we wait until we have? But I can tell you, as soon as the program is finished and the vaccine is approved, I will be first in line.
Pascal, I'm gonna press you, Ali. Forgive me for interrupting. So we haven't got to the distribution question, but I realised that we've got about 10 minutes left. And I just wanted to press a few things.
Yeah.
The first is, Pascal, just to be clear, you've talked a lot about patients. I heard from a government minister in the UK before the summer hopes in government circles that you might see an Oxford University AstraZeneca vaccine in the market before the end of the year. I suppose we're really clear now that's not going to happen. And so I was just wanted to get a sense from you of the answer to the original question of when you reasonably expect a vaccine in the market.
Yeah, first of all, patients. So long term, it's basically, I keep talking about medicines the whole day. And when you talk about medicine, you talk about patients. When it comes to vaccines, we should talk about people, because those are healthy individuals, not people who are unwell. I think that, of course, it depends on the outcome of this review. But if the review by the safety committee allowed us to restart the trial, I still think we are on track for having a set of data that we would submit before the end of the year. And then, of course, after this, it depends on how fast the regulator will review and give approval. So we could still have a vaccine by the end of this year, maybe early next year. But by the end of this year, it's still feasible. And by the way, there are two other vaccines that are actually moving very quickly. One is developed by Pfizer and the other one by Moderna in the US. Those are mRNA vaccines, and those are also advancing quite quickly in phase 3.
So you think that it's feasible for people to, if not expect, at least hope for the distribution of a vaccine in the first half of 2021?
I think so, yes. Basically, from a manufacturing viewpoint, we would be ready. And if we, again, lots of if, of course, but if we are able to restart the trial, that is a decision the safety committee has to make, of course. But if we did restart, then we still are on track, and I think we can ourselves deliver before the end of the year this data, and the same for the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. So I think we could have a vaccine. The question will be, we won't have a lot of vaccine, of course, because then you have to scale up the capacity and the manufacturing.
Right. Well, can we just come to that? One of our partners in this, as I said, Pascal, is the One campaign, and one of their big issues is to make sure that we see vaccine equity, a fairness in the distribution of the vaccine. Can you just talk about what's the government's role, what's AstraZeneca's role in how you deal with issues of price, of multilateralism, of fair treatment of different countries and people within those countries?
Yeah, actually, it's more than companies and governments. It's also NGOs. And for instance, the Bill Gates Foundation is playing a very big role. They are very generous, funding access to vaccines and other medicines. You have other organizations like CEPI Gavi, which, by the way, are also funded by Bill Gates. And so it's a collective effort, it's a team effort, if you will. Now, the way we've approached that ourselves is really we need to offer access to everybody as quickly as possible. And so for this, we've done two things. One is we said we will do this at no profit. And two is we said we need to scale up capacity around the world. And to do this, we need partners, because there's no single company in the industry that can produce the doses of vaccine that are needed by themselves. Nobody has the capacity, even the vaccines companies. So we've entered many agreements in India, in Brazil, in Russia, in China, in Japan, and in Europe and the US. We are also manufacturing with other companies that are helping us. So we have a European supply chain, a US supply chain, a supply chain for Latin America, one in different geographies.
So are you saying, Pascal, are you saying that we are almost inevitably going to see a repeat of the supply chain problems that we had with PPE, with ventilators, when it comes to vaccine distribution?
I don't think so. In our case, we are really scaling up rapidly, and we'll be able to supply everybody, every region, more or less at the same time. But the only way for us to do this was to partner with a number of other companies, which is what we've done. And the last thing you got to do, of course, is work with governments and NGOs. And we have a big agreement with CEPI Gavi to supply our vaccines. And we go back to Ali's question, to supply our vaccines to the low middle income countries, including, of course, refugee camps and other countries that can't afford that.
Yeah.
And that will be done through Gavi, who will ensure a fair and equitable distribution.
Okay, Pascal, thank you. I'm going to, if I may, do something slightly unfair to you just in the last few moments, which is invite a number of people just to make their points concisely to you. I mentioned Harry Moy, who'd raised the information point. I see David Pilling is talking about the trial in South Africa. I said I'd bring in Rani Das to begin with. So could I just ask each of those three to make their points swiftly to Pascal, and then Pascal, I'll ask you to answer them all together if you wouldn't mind. Harry, do you want to start?
Pascal, I was wondering about, in terms of the sort of the global distribution, what challenges that you'll be facing, and I suppose other pharmaceutical companies, are the fact that we're now in a world, this sort of populist world, where several of the largest nations in the world are very much ex-first centric. So they're very much going to be focusing on themselves instead of going out. We saw the rumor about Trump and the thing in Germany. What challenges are you going to be facing as a company making those decisions as to who you're going to be distributing it to, and those sort of forceful approaches that they might be taking as well?
Harry, thank you. Oh, Pascal, forgive me. I'm going to invite Rani and David just to make their points and then come back to you. Rani, you just need to unmute. There you are. You're there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you there.
Okay, thank you. Hi. With regards to collecting data, will there be any data collected after the trial have been given to people? And for different age groups who are taking the vaccine, so children or older people, people with health conditions, will that be taken into consideration? And the actual vaccine itself, is it preventative? Will it stop the spread? Can the COVID-19, does it lay dormant? I mean, is the vaccine, will it stop the effects? And is it something that, that can come back at a later date? And
Rani, I can't, Rani, I'm going to stop you there because we won't have time for Pascal to answer all of those questions.
Sorry.
they're all great. They're all great, but there'll be too many. And I'm just going to, but Rani, thank you very much. I'm finally going to bring David Pilling in and Ludwig Berger from Reuters. David, hello.
Hi, you're trialing the vaccine in South Africa. My question is there an arrangement in place so that South Africans will get kind of early dibs on any vaccine? I believe you do have an arrangement with Brazil, but how about South Africa? And if not, do you not risk a backlash, people saying that they're being, used as guinea pigs, which is something that you do here around Africa? And how are you dealing with that potential?
All right, David, thank you very much. By the way, while you were speaking, David, Joe Sorrell from the Gates campaign is applauding you for the piece you did on the FT on eradicating polio and what it tells us about COVID. So everyone do go and read that. And finally, Ludwig, do you want to just put the point to Pascal, and then all the best of luck, Pascal, in answering all of these?
Many thanks. Thanks, Pascal. This clinical hold that we're now seeing, was this something you would have published of your own volition even without the stat report? And if so, when? Or would you have announced this adverse event maybe only after the Safety Monitoring Board has made a call on a restart or a stop, just on the timing of things? And at the risk of getting bogged down in details, I just would love you to clarify whether this indeed was a UK-based woman and that she's improving and will likely be discharged from hospital, or has been discharged, and whether she was indeed part of the active arm of the trial and not the meningitis arm. Thanks.
Ludwig, thank you. So Pascal, there was America First, Data and Generations, South Africa, and transparency around the halt.
Yeah, so maybe Harry's question about distribution is connected to David's question about South Africa. We sort of assumed from the beginning that we needed to establish separate supply chain in different geographies, because we thought governments could try to protect themselves or their country first, of course. So we have a supply chain in the US, one in Europe, The vaccines that will be distributed in Europe are made in Europe. We even have one for the UK. We have one in Russia. We have one in India. We have one in China, one in Japan, one in Argentina, Mexico for Latin America. So we will be able to supply everybody at the same time. And we've been lucky to be able to partner with groups like CEPI, Gavi, the Bill Gates Foundation. The Carlos Slim Foundation is helping out for Latin America. And so working together, we're able to supply every region of the world, more or less at the same time.
Right.
So I think we want to really provide access to everybody around the world at the same time, because we are now close to 3 billion doses of vaccines that we could manufacture, and we will not be alone. Other vaccines will also be out there. Some may be more usable, if I would say, in parts of the world than others because of the storage conditions, but over time it may also change. So when you combine all the vaccines that are the most advanced ones, I think there will be enough vaccines for everybody. The question is not there in my mind. The question is whether they work or not, and we will know that soon. Hopefully, I mean, we all keep our fingers crossed. We'll know soon whether they work and whether they're safe. And South Africa, of course, we will be able to supply South Africa. We also, every country where we do a trial, we make sure the country is supplied because it's sort of part of, how would you call it? I mean, it's part of the way things are done. When you do a trial in a country, you make sure they get supplied. But here, anyway, we will be able to supply everybody. In terms of the data collection, yes, we will have data in every age group. When you do when you develop a vaccine, you start with the healthy adults. So this is people between the age of 18 to 55. When you have enough data, then you start vaccinating people who are above 55. And later you go back and look at children. That's a standard process. In that instance, of course, there will be data in children, but later. And there's not a big rush because, as you know, children don't seem to be as much affected. But we will have data in different age group, in children, in people with health conditions. You got to think about people who are, for instance, on dialysis. Their immune system is not the same, so you have to know whether the vaccine works in the specific population. So you need to do all sorts of additional studies to demonstrate the efficacy in different populations. And an important point that a question was asked is about prevention. What does the vaccine do? And I should have covered this up front with your initial question, James. And another question that we will be studying, we're studying in the trial, in the program, is will the vaccine sterilize the virus? So basically completely eliminate the virus from your respiratory tract very quickly and therefore stop the spread? Or will the vaccine stop people from being sick, but you still carry the virus for a little while and you can contaminate others? If you look at flu, the flu vaccine doesn't protect everybody. And of those people who don't get ill, some remain carrier of the virus. So we need all these answers, and they will come out of the clinical program.
And Pascal, I'm just going to press you because I see that we've way run out of time. But just a final question, answer to Ludwig's question, which is, would you have published this earlier, and what do you now know about the patient? Yeah. So the publication. I mean, we don't. When you conduct a clinical trial, you basically inform the regulators, the authorities. That's what you do, right? I mean, you don't go and publish, make big announcements in the press. I mean, this is a scientific process, and basically you don't hide anything. You just, but you work with professionals, with the people who have the expertise and are the regulators. So essentially, you inform the regulators. So of course, immediately when we had the event, we paused the study. We informed the regulators in the countries, in the various countries, and we also informed all the other sites around the world to pause their study and inform their regulator.
So that's how you do it. You inform the regulator, you study the event, and then you restart. You don't go out and sort of make press announcements. That's not the process.
Pascal, I'm gonna cut you off. As you can see, we could happily have this conversation all morning. We have in the waiting room the former Prime Minister of Australia, the UN envoy for youth, and Jim O'Neill, one of the world's great economists, because our next session, which is going to be edited by my colleague Liz Mosley, is about whether or not we can respond to this pandemic with an eye to equality, the economic impacts of it. So I'm afraid we're going to have to call an end to this. Can I say a huge thank you to you, Pascal? I appreciate how much is on your plate, but actually coming here and helping us understand it gives us a really important platform for understanding what else can be done in the world in the course of the conversations today. So we can't applaud you, but we can thank you, Pascal. Many thanks.
My accent won't tell you this, but I'm an Australian citizen, so I won't keep Julia Gilliard. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Very good. Pascal, thank you very much. Have a good day. And please join us, everyone. In a couple of minutes, my colleague Liz Mosley is going to kick off on the next session. As you can see, it's going to be, as I said, around economy and whether or not we can address the fundamental issues of inequality.